here. So thanks for joining on this webinar on ISO 14971-2019, tips to do better risk assessment on medical devices. This has been our fourth webinar. The previous one have been very successful. So today we have three panelists, including me. First is Samuel Wade, who has been veteran in medical device industry, more than 40 years of experience in various therapeutic areas, various large and startup companies. And I have Arun Dash. Arun has been a regulatory and clinical expert with the SARACA Solutions, and he will be the lead presenter for today. So before I waste any time, I'd request Arun to jump onto the presentation. Over to you, Arun.
Thank you, Kuldeep. Thanks for your wonderful introduction. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all the folks who have joined in this webinar. We're doing series of webinars, so you can see them in the links and in the YouTube as well in our channel. We have done one in the last month and few in the later months, and we have already scheduled one in the next month, same time, same date. So Kuldeep will tell you the name and details at the end of this webinar, so you can save that in your calendar. Today we are myself Arunashu Dash. I am a senior clinical expert, SARACA Solution. I have around 7 years of experience in clinical, regulatory, and quality field. I have been working with many Fortune 500 companies, 500 medical device companies, as a client, is a direct or indirect client. Let's come to our topic today. As you know, guys, means today we are going to do our webinar on risk assessment on medical devices. So 14971, ISO 14971, I think you know that this standard is to do the risk management for medical devices. In recent past, in this 2019 year, in the year 2019, so this ISO 14971 third edition came into effect. So there are many major changes has been done in this 2019 edition. So the earlier edition was the second edition, that was in 2007. So there are many major changes have been implemented in this 2019 version. So they are going to change your risk assessment process, risk management files, risk management documentations, which you have for your existing medical devices. So that's why we bring this topic. We prepared this webinar to help you to get better understand this risk assessment, how to do the risk assessment as per this new edition, this new 2019 edition of ISO 14971. So today's agenda is I will give you an introduction of risk management. Then I will give you the new terms and definition. The new terms and definition has been added in this 2019 edition. That was the third edition of ISO 14971. I will give you a brief introduction of this new terms and definition, and there are some potential definition as well. So I will explain you. Then I'll give you a brief on the risk management process, how you can do the risk management in a sequential manner. What is the steps you can follow to do a better risk management. Then risk management plan. Obviously, when you do, when you need to go for a risk management, risk assessment, risk management system, then you need to first prepare a plan. That is RMP, risk management plan. So I will give you the components. What are the components you need to define in your risk management plan? Then risk analysis process and tools. What are the analysis process? What are the tools you can follow, you can use to do a risk analysis? So I'll explain you those. Then evaluation of overall residual risk. So I think all of you know that overall residual risk is the most critical part. So how to evaluate the overall residual risk? That is the most critical part of the whole risk management system. So I will tell you that how you can evaluate in a proper manner, how you can evaluate the overall residual risks. Then benefit risk analysis, how you can show that my device is my device benefit is more than the risk associated with my device. So how you can claim that the benefit outweighs the risk. I will tell you the process how you can do a better benefit risk analysis for your medical device. Then production and post-production activities. I'll ask Sam is with me, so he will explain you that how this what is the effect of production and post-production activities, and how you can do risk management with the production and post-production activities. Then last ISO 14971 2007 to 2019, that what are the major changes. I have prepared a slide, and I have also and I just want to tell you that ISO 24971, that was the very important standard, has been released with in this year only, to the 2022. That is the second edition. So I have also put the requirement of 24971 2020 along with this 14971 2019 against the 14971 2007 edition. So I will this also Sam will give you a brief on what are the major changes from the 2007, that is the second edition, from this to this third edition. So I'll just give you a brief on this history. So I just want to give you a schematical representation of this history of ISO 14971. So how the editions came into effect, and how the amendments made to the editions, then how 24971 came into effect. So let's start with ISO 14971 first edition. So the first edition was introduced in the year of 2000. Then the second edition came into effect on the year of 2007. Then again there the third edition came in the earlier year, that was in 2019. But there are two amendments are there between the second edition and the third edition. Those came in the year of, one in 2009 and one is 2012. Those are amendments, those are not addition. So then after 2012 amendment, then this ISO TR 24971 came into effect, because during this time that medical device manufacturer faced a tremendous number of issues, number of challenges to implement the requirement of 14971 in their risk management activities, how they can implement the risk control measures, and there are number of challenges came into effect. So this ISO TR 24971 24971 came into effect. So this explains you, this is a supporting standard. This explains you in a better manner that how you can implement the requirement of 14971. So first, the 24971 launched in the year of 2013. That was the first edition of 24971. So then this ISO 14971 third edition, that was 2019 version, came into effect in the year of 2019. Then again the ISO 24971 has been revised from the first edition to the second edition in this year only, 2020, and that was updated according to this ISO 14971 2019 version only. So you can refer this 24971 2020 to follow the process how you can implement the risk control measures which were defined in this third edition of 14971. So I'll give you an introduction to risk management. What is risk? So risk is the combination of probability and occurrence of harm and the severity of the harm. The occurrence and the severity, both the combination of both these elements came into is resulted into the risk what we are doing in our medical devices. Then the risk management, it is a systematic application of management policies, procedures, and practices to the task of analyzing, evaluating, and controlling the risk. Then obviously the risk is very much difficult to avoid. You cannot avoid the 100% risk, but you can mitigate. You can minimize. Mitigate means minimize. You can minimize the risks as far as possible. So always you need to try to minimize the risk as far as possible. So this risk management activities came into effect. Why this risk management came? it is only this ISO 14971 is all about to minimize your risks which are associated with your medical devices. To minimize the risks, this risk management system came into effect, and you need to implement this risk management system to minimize or to mitigate the risk as far as possible which we are associated with your medical devices. Then I have listed a few new terms and definitions. These new terms and definitions were introduced in this 2019 version, in this third edition only. So the new terms are benefit, reasonably foreseeable misuse, and state of the art. And I kept one potential definition as well. That was accompanying documentation. So I'll just explain you what is accompanying documentation. Accompanying documentation means all the documents, all the labeling related documents which were going to the user, going with the medical device, and which used from the installation phase to the decomposition or disposal phase, means from the installation to use, how you are using your device, how you decommission your device, or how you dispose your device. So all these instructions were written in which document are called as accompanying documentation. So the examples like you can take instruction for use IFUs, user manuals. So these are the accompanying documentation labels. So these are the accompanying documentation for your medical devices. Then benefits. Benefit is all type of positive impact or desirable outcome from our medical device, or the positive impact on the patient or the public health. So these are the this is called as benefit. Then reasonable foreseeable misuse. Reasonable foreseeable misuse is a very critical term, has been implemented in this standard. So what is it all about? Like, foreseeable misuse means sometimes what happened, like when doctors doing a procedure or any procedure, then sometimes they pushed over their limit, and they go beyond the instruction. They go they do something off level. They use the medical device off level, that called as off level use. So, and that according to the human behavior, that according to the point of human behavior. So sometimes that acceptable. So this new definition came into effect, that was reasonably foreseeable misuse. Then state of the art. So this is a very know-how term for our medical device. Nowadays you can see this term in everywhere in this medical device standard. So state of the art is just a current knowledge of our device according to the product, processes and services, and the current science, technology and experience. So it's only defined on the current knowledge and technology and experience of our medical device.
Yeah, if I could make two comments, I'd like to expand upon the accompanying documentation, because this certainly does affect your putting together directions for use that include your risk. So this is going to require a new approach to doing your labeling, which includes DFUs for your product. The other thing that needs to be included is you need to be thinking about which regulatory jurisdiction you're in, because decommissioning and disposal of the medical device varies according to where you are. For example, the US and Europe have two differing systems for how you document disposal of your medical device, and what you have to do and what you have to include in your directions for use to assure that you dispose of it correctly. The other thing that I would like to expand, Arun did a remarkably good job explaining it, but this is something about reasonably foreseen misuse. The thing that the standard does not define, and it's not defined in TR 24971 either, is what does predictable human behavior mean? There's no definition of it, so you really have to sit down and think about the possible misuse of your device, whether, as Arun noticed, using it off-label, using it for an intended use that it was not intended for example, using a laser for an aesthetic procedure when it was only intended for surgical use, using it in a totally different field than it was intended for example, using it in an OBGYN field as opposed to a dermatology field. So I think it's very important to be trying to think about these as you're going through your risk management process. Thank you, Arun.
Thank you. So in this, I'm going to explain you the risk management process, how you can do a risk management by step and stepwise. So the manufacturer should establish, implement, document, and maintain an ongoing process for the hazardous and hazardous situation associated with a medical device. You need to identify, first you need to identify the hazard or hazardous situation which were associated with your medical device. So this is the first step you need to take. You need to identify the hazards. Then you need to estimate or evaluate the associated risks. You need to check the risks which were associated with your medical device. Then you need to estimate and evaluate them. That risks, what are the risks associated with our device, and how that was more effect, or that was less, there is more impact or there's less impact on our device. So you need to estimate or you need to evaluate those risks. Then controlling these risks. So this controlling these risks, this risk management activities came into effect. So you need to control your risk. You need to minimize or you need to mitigate. Whenever I am telling controlling, means you need to minimize your risk. So controlling these risks is very much required. You need to follow these risk management process, risk control measures to control your risks or to minimize or mitigate your risk. Then you can monitor the effectiveness. Once you control, once you mitigate your risks, then you need to monitor the effectiveness of the risk control measures. You need to implement risk control measure to control your risks or to minimize your risks. So once you implement those risk control measures, then you need to check periodically or in some time you need to follow up with the risk control measures. Are those risk control measures which we are implemented are performed properly or not? So you need to check. So to monitor the effectiveness is very much critical, very much needed of the risk control measures.
Arun, if I would like to add one thing on the effectiveness, a few example of audit I faced with FDA last year before pandemic. Out of 3 days, I faced audit on behalf of my customer from FDA. Half of the day was focused only on effectiveness of risk control measures. There was no that aggressive focus on effectiveness 5 years ago, 10 years ago, but you do a kappa and you find a corrective preventive action, you implement that, and you were doing some sort of effectiveness measure earlier. But I think notified bodies and regulators these days are very keen on keen to know how you are monitoring your effectiveness. How are you measuring? Is that effectiveness what you had planned while you implemented a kappa? Is that really effective? Did you change how many of your risk measures, risk control measures, which you identified at the beginning? Have you really changed them? You have to be very practical. It is not just you make certain assessment and you implement them, and you would definitely do some sort of monitoring of effectiveness. But I think these days it has to be very aggressive and very efficient to practically to show it to regulators and notified bodies that you really mean what you did earlier as a decision and how you are implementing them.
I'd like to expand on that a little bit because I fully agree with you. Some of the notified bodies, as well as FDA, have come through the facilities I've been associated with. And even though we did effectiveness checks and we did document those, we did not go back as part of the internal audit process and look at those and document those as part of the internal audit. And the notified bodies want that done. They want that included in the internal audit, at least the notified bodies I've been associated with. The other thing that is more detailed than it used to be is when you look at a kappa procedure, and you submit it to your notified body. You need to be more thorough in addressing the root cause and your solutions. You can't just look at the CAPA or the audit finding and address that only. It has to be looked at in terms of a systems failure, and look at it throughout your system and how is it effective, and address it as a systems issue, and your effectivity needs to be looked at from the same perspective. Those are two very important. I agree with you. And if you want to avoid a finding, we suggest that you concentrate on those issues in the upcoming audits. And this was under MDD, not under MDR, so there was less focus than there will be in the coming months and next year especially. Thank you.
Absolutely, Sam.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you, Kuldeep. Now I'll tell you about risk management plan. So this is the very initial part. This is a very initial step you need to take during your whole risk management activities. So first you need to fix up. First you need to list down your plan, that what you are going to do, how you are going to do. So risk management plan, what are the components? So risk management activities, risk acceptability, risk control measures, production and post-production information, overall residual risk. So these are the component of risk management plan. So how you can list down the requirement. Risk management activities, you need to identify and describe the all medical device and the life cycle phases. Your medical device life cycle and your medical device description you need to define in this section, and the requirements for review. What are the requirements? What are the information? What are the requirements you need to review? Then you need to assign the responsibility and authorities, that who are going to do what. You need to assign the responsibilities to all the authorities. Then risk acceptability, you need to define the criteria of the risk acceptability. First, this is a very critical part. So if you not define the criteria, then it will be very difficult during estimating or evaluating your residual risk or your risk. So first you need to define the acceptability criteria. So you need to define what are the criteria, which type of risks I am going to accept and which type of risks I am going to not accept in my risk assessment process. So then risk control measures. So once you estimate all your risks in this risk acceptability, after implementing the risk acceptability criteria, then you need to go for the risk control measures, because you are going to control those risks. So how you are going to control those risks? You need to implement risk control measures. So once you implement the risk control measures, then you can mitigate or minimize the risk. So whatever the risk control measures been implemented, you need to verify. So the verification of those implementation of the risk control measure is very much required. Those are very necessary. So you need to list down the requirement for this verification of the implementation of risk control measures and the effectiveness as well. As Sam and Kuldeep told you in the earlier slide, the effectiveness is very critical in our medical device industry. So you need to first do the verification and of the implementation, and then you need to check, you need to monitor, and you need to follow up the implementation process, so that you can track the effectiveness of your risk control measures. Then production and post-production activities, production, post-production information. So you need to collect and review. So you need to collect the information during the production phase as well as the post-production phase, and then you need to review. So you need to list the criteria to how you are collecting and how you review the production and post-production information. Then overall residual risk. So once you finalize your overall residual risk, so that there you need criteria that what type of overall residual risk you are going to accept and what type of overall residual risk you are going to not accepting. So at that time you need to define the criteria. So what are the criteria you are following to accept the overall residual risk? So those criteria also need to be defined. The acceptability of how you are going to accept the overall residual risk, and what are the process you are going to implement or evaluate the overall residual risk. So you need to define all those requirements in this risk management plan. Risk management file. So risk management file is the bunch of is the file which contains all type of risk documentations of your medical device. So the manufacturer shall establish and maintain this risk management file, because the risk management file, the RMF, is very required. RMF is most required in the portion where you need to trace your hazards. So there are many hazards you may face during your medical device use or from the post-market surveillance activities. So it's very difficult to trace all those hazards. So if you will put all those documentation in a single in a one document or in a one file, then it will be really helpful for you to trace all those hazards, all those identified hazards which were associated or which had happened in your earlier medical device in your earlier phase, which you get from your post-market surveillance or any complaints process. So what are the components, what are the documentation you are going to documented in the risk management file? So all type of risk analysis document, all risk evaluation document, then all the verification document of your implemented risk control measures. So what the process, the verification document, the implementation process, and all the verification process of the risk control measures. Then the results of evaluation of the residual risks, how you are evaluating, how you are estimating, what are the results, what are the final residual risks. So all those documents need to be documented in your RMF, that is risk management file.
Arun, if I could add one comment, I think this is very interesting slide.
Yes.
And from our observation of many tech files in DHF, we have written in recent past and in our, I mean, we do see plenty of RMF files when we write CRs for many of our customers. We have found that companies who are not typical medical device manufacturers, for many years, they lack in this area quite a bit. We have seen in our tech file and CR writing in recent past 2 to 3 years, folks whose devices were never classified earlier and they became a class 1 medical device, they really had no idea about risk management file. Doing DFMEA is like overwhelming for them. But it requires a lot of training and understanding that all the documents which are related to risk has to be put together in this file. When a notified body comes and asks you the risk related documentation, if you run around and could not get them all together, you will definitely have an observation, if not a non-conformance. So it's very important that risk management file has to be maintained rigorously, has to be updated. I think one of the very critical pieces, even the large device companies we have seen, they have RMF, but many times they forget to update. There is in your procedure, it's written what is the frequency of update of RMF file. If it is 1 year, it could be 6 months, could be 3 months, based on if you have introduced a product in the market and you want to assess risk, and then it could be 3 months. Then you need to look at and really update your risk management file and to assess or a PMS data. I think if you have a PMS data from the market which tells you that hey, you better look at your DFMEA, PFMEA, and perhaps you might have to increase or reduce the risk associated with some of the harm and causes, right? In that case, you will have to update your RMF. So this is very important file. I would recommend all of our viewers that you please maintain a file. If you don't maintain, list all the document which comes under it, make a periodic evaluation of RMF. Your life will be a lot easier when you face an audit from notified body or regulator. Thanks.
Yeah, I'd like to expand upon that a little bit when you talk about risk analysis now. One of the things that needs to be looked at is exactly how you do your risk analysis. The tools that we used to use in the past, the FEMA, some of the other tools are not exactly totally applicable at this point because they only do the fault condition. You need to use risk analysis tools that also include the normal condition, and you can look at some of these multiple risk analysis tools that are in TR 24971, Annex E and Annex B1, paragraph 2. Those will give you some other ideas for expanding your use of risk analysis tools to make sure that you cover all of the important points of risk analysis. As far as traceability goes, I fully agree with Kuldeep. I've seen those type of documents in several varieties in different companies, and having a trace matrix or a traceability chart is extremely important to convince the either the authorities or your notified body auditors that you have covered all your risk and that you've mitigated them and you've identified all your hazards. It's extremely important to ensure that. The other change that's occurred with the 2019 edition is that top management has to define what the risk is that they will accept as top management. And the other thing is that a risk management file and the evaluation of your risk must be reviewed at planned intervals, excuse me. And that's not part of the QMS annual or semi-annual, how often you do it, quality management review. It's a specific planned review of your risk analysis that's done by management or appointed authorities who have the appointed personnel who have the authorities and the background to be able to do a thorough risk analysis. I just wanted to point those out because those are some additions that are somewhat new to this standard. Thanks, Arun.
Great point, Sam. Thanks for adding.
Thank you. So risk analysis process. I'm going to tell you that what is the process you can do a risk analysis. It's just like you need to identify and the description of the medical device that was analyzed. So what the device you are going to, what are the device you are going to do the risk assessment on. So you need to identify and you need to do the device description. So this device description is like a very lengthy process in our medical device industry. So just first you need to finalize your device description in a proper manner. So then only you can describe your device in a proper sequence, means all your technology or your science background. So you need to define your device description in a proper manner. So first you need to do that. Then you need to identification of the person and organization who carried out your risk analysis. So this authorities or this identification of the authorities or organization is very required. You need to identify the person, if any person from your device or any sometimes the medical device industry, medical device companies hire third parties to do the risk analysis. So you need to identify them in the very initial stage. You need to identify a person from your company or an organization from outside your company or from any from a third party. So you need to identify that person or organization who is going to carry out the risk analysis. Then you need to define very clearly the scope. The scope need to be very clear for your risk assessment or risk analysis process, and the date and the period. You need to define the period, that what is the period I am going to take to do my complete risk analysis. So you need to define your period or the date of the risk analysis.
Arun, if you would allow me to add one point on this slide, I think very important one. The second, the one in the middle, you mentioned identification of persons, yes, organizations who carried out risk analysis. I mean, from my consultant career, I have seen that many companies who are not good at doing risk analysis, they obviously go out to take help of consultants like us, and we perhaps do that for them. Many times, they say that, can you perform DFMEA, PFMEA, complete all the paperwork and give it to us? And my answer to them is, or my question to them is, I could do it for you, but you have to provide training to your staff, because when auditor comes, we may be there, we may not be there, but you might have to face the auditor and provide answers. So I would emphasize that training your own folks in doing risk analysis up to the latest standard is very important. Many people claim that they know how to do risk analysis, but in our assessment, we found that only less than 10% people, we did a survey, and we found that less than 10% people who are involved in risk analysis does really know all the aspects of doing risk analysis. So 90% of the people, who claim that they are doing risk analysis, they have missing understanding of the standard, or perhaps they are not applying the standard or available tools to do a full assessment of your product. And as you know, be it FDA or notified bodies or other regulators around the world, risk analysis becomes very important. Many times I have seen that when you launch your product, you have certain risk level of certain cause. Down the line, you are not either you are getting so many complaints on that feature of your product, or you're not getting complaints, but you have forgotten to change your risk. From last 4 years, it remains the same. And when you compare, your initial assessment of risk has really changed in last 4 years. You were supposed to go back and change your risk based on the outcome of your product in the market. And that is one of the very missing elements I've seen in my observation, which people do not really pay attention. And that attention will only come when you train your engineers, you train your folks who are doing risk analysis really, really well, have a good questionnaire, and also follow your standard religiously. If you said that you're going to update your RMF annually, you just don't have to update to complete your paperwork. You need to assess your DFIMA, PFIMA, your user failure mode effect analysis. You will have to complete whole 9 yards and see if there is something which you might have learned from your post-market surveillance and PMCF surveys and things which are coming back to you from the market.
Thank you, Kuldeep. Thanks for this explanation. Risk analysis tools. So how you are going to do the risk analysis? What are the tools you are going to use to do risk analysis? First, you need to check the biocompatibility. So in this biocompatibility, you need to check the risk. You need to analyze the risks associated with the materials, with your biological component of your medical device. So you need to check this biocompatibility for your risk analysis. Then you can move forward to the design phase. So in this design phase, as Kuldeep told you in the earlier slide, that DFME is a very necessary tool to do risk analysis, and this is a very tedious job as well for the companies, for all companies. So DFMEA, you need to, during the design phase, you need to do a very detailed DFMEA, that was design failure mode effective analysis, so that the design of the device is out of risk, so that once the device has been manufactured, and so that you can the overall residual risk will not be acceptable. So this to mitigate the risks during the design phase is very necessary, because you cannot go, it is very difficult to go beyond, go again to your design phase and to change your design and to change your the materials, and again you need to do all the processes in the repeated manner. So in the design phase, you need to do this DFMEA. Then you can go to the process phase and the manufacturing or other processes phase. So in this other process phase or manufacturing process phase, you can do PFMEA, that is process failure mode effective analysis. So here I have referred to the manufacturing PFMEA. In the manufacturing phase, you can do manufacturing PFMEA to mitigate the risk to evaluate or risk analysis to do the risk analysis during the process phase. Then risk control implementation. Then once you do these analysis, then you can implement the risk control measures. Once you implement the risk control measures, I told you earlier in our earlier slides that once you implement anything, then you need to do the verification. So risk control implementation and risk control verification need to be required during after this DFMA and PFMA. Then risk traceability summary. So once you implement and one is to verify, then you need to trace the risks. Then you need to trace that what are the risks were associated in which phase of device. Then you need to trace the risks associated in the internet use of the device. Then clinical trials with the device. Is there any risks are associated with the clinical trials which you have performed for your medical device? Then safety. What are the safety you are claiming for your medical device? Are there any risks associated with that? Then usability engineering, and that is a very critical thing, that usability engineering. So you need to evaluate, you need to check the risks, whatever the risks is associated with the usability, because usability is a very critical process in your medical device. Because if a device is not usable, the usability of the device is not acceptable or not good, then the device cannot be used by the clinician or by the caregivers. So there is no meaning to develop a medical device. So you need to check the risk which were associated with the usability engineering of your medical device. Then preliminary hazard analysis. Obviously, in the initial phase, you need to do hazard analysis. Are there any hazards we are associated with your medical device or not? So in this preliminary hazard analysis, you can evaluate the risks from these hazards which were identified in this very preliminary phase.
Yeah, I would just like to add a caution to this. Recently, I've been asked by auditors about biocompatibility. In the past, it's been relatively well defined that biocompatibility pertains to does your device come in contact with the patient? You know, how long it's in contact for, what manner of use is it in contact, at braided skin, through the skin, etc. However, the auditor of the tech file was very specific, and he wanted us to take in consideration the biocompatibility as it relates to the operator of the device. And this is something that was not considered during the development of the device, and necessitates going back and looking at the risk associated with an operator using the device or come in contact with some portion. For example, using a graphical interface device, you come in contact with the screen by pressing it. Does that present a hazard? And do you need to look at biocompatibility of that? So I just wanted to point that out. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Sam. So risk evaluation. So how you evaluate a risk? Because from hazardous situation you can identify the risks, but to evaluate the risks is very critical. For the process, how you can evaluate your risks. So when hazardous situation came, you can evaluate the estimated risks. Whenever you are facing a hazardous situation, the hazardous situation can you can get this hazardous situation from your PMS data, from the complaints, from the customer feedback, from during the PMCF as well. So you can get this hazardous situation during these processes. But once you get this hazardous situation, then you need to evaluate the estimated risk. At the very preliminary stage, you need to first evaluate what is the estimated risk we are associated with this hazardous situation. Then once you estimated that risk, then you need to check according to the criteria. You have already defined the criteria in the RMP, risk management plan. So according to those criteria, you need to see that are these risks, are these estimated risks which we are estimated from the hazardous situation are acceptable or not. So you need to check with the criteria which you are defined in the RMP. With those criteria, you can define that are the risks are acceptable or not. So you need to go for the next step. If acceptable, yes, is the risk is acceptable, then if yes, then you need to directly proceed to the completeness of the risk control. and you need to estimate the overall residual risks. Are there any overall residual risks? If yes, then you need to estimate those overall residual risks. But if the risk is not acceptable, which were estimated or which were evaluated with the criteria, and it was defined that the risks were not acceptable, then you need to perform all the risk control activities. All the risk control activities, these risk control activities were defined in the clause 7, that was 7.1 to 7.6. You need to perform all the risk control activities according to the clause 7.1 to 7.6 of this risk management standard ISO 14971 2019 version. So risk control option analysis. Sam, I want you to do this slide for me.
Sure. I did want to expand a little bit on the previous slide. One thing that's very important as part of your design process, which may or may not be included now, is that before you can release your product into commercial distribution, the last phase of your design process needs to include a review of the risk analysis, and is it adequate for the device, and did you meet all your goals? So from a risk control option analysis, the manufacturer shall determine the risk control measures appropriate for reducing the risk to an acceptable level. You can do this by or as part of 3 levels of risk control options. The first one is inherently safe design and manufacture. This particular one is now related to ISO 13485 in that 13485 needs you to do the risk assessment before you do your design inputs, meaning you have to do your risk analysis at the same time you're designing your product and ensure that you have an inherently safe design. And the next part of your process is to ensure that when you're manufacturing that device or IVD or whatever the product is, that you manufacture it in a safe way or a way that will mitigate any risk that may or may not be identified as part of your process. For example, your wiring harnesses on an electromechanical device, are they held in place? Do they take sharp corners? Do they go through areas that have, for example, a hole in one wall? Do they go through that hole and can rub back and forth and eventually cause a hazard? Do you have enclosures over moving parts that will reduce the risk of an operator putting their fingers or hands or arms into that device and incurring harm? Protection measures in the medical device itself or in the manufacturing process refers to this. It would be, for example, removing rough corners on a device so that you don't induce a cut or a laceration when you're moving the device from one location to another. If it's too heavy and you try to move it, should you be including wheels? Should you be including a cart for that? And then the last but not least is what kind of information will you include to ensure the safety and where appropriate training for use of the devices. For example, if you are using something that's known to physicians or healthcare workers, such as a scalpel, you don't have to go out and train people how to do that. It's assumed they learn that when they're earning their MD or whatever professional degree. However, if you're using a complex machine, such as an MRI machine or a laser, you need to consider going out and at the time you're installing this machine to train the people who will be using it and do a general training of any operators that may be there. And certifying them or giving them some kind of certification that they have gone through this process, because Joint Commission, at least in the United States, will look to see this. if you determine that a risk control analysis, that the risk is not practical, the manufacturer needs to conduct the benefit risk analysis of the residual risk. And if you can't do that, you need to consider going back. If the residual risk overwhelms the benefit, you may need to go back and look at the design of your process or your manufacturing process or the design of the device and consider modification. Each risk control measure needs to be verified, and then the verification shall be recorded in the risk management file, which is then reviewed as part of your verification before you release it into the market.
Yes. Thank you, Sam.
You're welcome.
Here, evaluation of overall residual risk. So once you finalize the risk analysis, then you have the residual risk with you. You cannot avoid. I told you at the very first starting of our slides that you cannot avoid 100% risks which were associated with your medical device. So there are few risks which were associated with your medical device still. So those called as residual risks. So to evaluate once, so how you can evaluate those overall residual risks which were associated with your medical device, and what you will do once you evaluate or once you estimated the overall residual risks. So after implementing all risk control measures, so once you implemented all the risk control measures and you verified all the risk control measures and all are on place, all are in on place, but you have minimized the risks as far as possible. You minimized or you controlled or you mitigated the risks as far as possible. But then you need to evaluate. Then you find there are still risks are there which are associated with your medical device. Those called as overall residual risks. So here you can evaluate those overall residual risks, and you need to overlay, and then you need to check the criteria. Then you need to check these overall residual risks are acceptable or not acceptable. So this acceptability of the overall residual risks are already been defined in your RMP risk management plan. I have already told you that in the RMP the criteria for acceptability of your overall residual risks need to be defined by those criteria, that how you are going to evaluate your, how you are going to how you are going to evaluate your how you are going to accept, or how are you going to accept, or are you going to not accept the overall residual risks. Uh, if the overall residual risk is acceptable, then the manufacturer need to disclose all the manufacturer need to disclose all the residual risks in the accompanying documentation. So in the accompanying documentation, I already told you the accompanying documentation are the document which were which used to go with the device to the users from the installation to the decommissioning phase. All the documentation related to the installing of the device to the decommissioning phase. So you need to disclose all those risks, all those overall residual risks. If those are acceptable, you need to disclose all those overall residual risks in those documentation. So that's are acceptable. Then if the overall residual risk is not acceptable, if you find with those criteria that the overall residual risks which were evaluated are not acceptable, then the manufacturer, as Sam told you earlier, that you need to go to the design phase. The manufacturer may consider sometimes the manufacturer may consider implementing additional risk control measures. Then you need to check, are there any additional risk control measures he can implement. Then he can go back to the risk control analysis and he can implement more risk control measures. But if it is not possible, then the medical device, then the manufacturer need to modify the medical device. Means he need to go to the design phase and he need to again change the design of the medical device or the intended use Otherwise, the overall residual risk remains unacceptable. This complete evaluation of overall residual risk process has been very much properly defined in the ISO 124971 clause 4.4.6 and clause 8, and also there is an annexure regarding this evaluation of overall residual risk, that was annexure D. So benefit risk analysis. I'm going to tell you that what are the benefit, what are the process you can perform during the benefit risk analysis. You need to first check the decision factor. Are the risks are acceptable or unacceptable? So then you need to check the scope. You need to prepare your scope. You need to create your scope very clearly. You can define the scope very clearly. Then you need to assign the responsibility and authorities. So assignment of responsibility and authorities are very required. Then you need to check the requirements for review. What are the requirements you need to review the risks, the benefit risk analysis. Then criteria for risk acceptability. I already told you that the criteria, defining criteria for the risk acceptability is very required. So you need to define the criteria for risk acceptability. Then methods to evaluate the overall residual risk. You need to define you can clearly define the method how you are going to evaluate the overall residual risk. Then once these methods have been implemented, then you need to check the verification of effectiveness. So once anywhere once you implement any method, or once you implement anything in any process, then you need to verify those methods, or we need to verify those process. And once you do the verification, you need to check the effectiveness. So to check the effectiveness, as Kuldeep and Sam already told you earlier, that to checking effectiveness is very critical in medical device industry. Then you need to check the verification of effectiveness. Then at last, you need to review of relevant post-production and post-production information. So whatever information you can collect, though you can review those production and post-production information at the last of the benefit risk analysis. Risk management review. Prior to release any device, so once you finalize all your risk management documentation, so all prior to release the device to the market, so you need to check once last time for all your criterias, or all your plan, all the risk management plan has been appropriately implemented throughout the medical device life or not. So you need to review that all the requirements which were listed in my risk management plan has been appropriately implemented or not. So then once all those implemented properly, if yes, then you need to go for the overall residual risks. You need to check the overall residual risks which were estimated or which were evaluated throughout the risk management activities. Then you need to check that are those overall residual risks are acceptable or not. Then if acceptable, then you need to go for the further process. Then you need to check are there appropriate methods are in place to collect and review the production and post-production activities, production and post-production information. I already told you that once the overall residual risk is acceptable, then you need to check are there methods are in place so that you can collect and review the production and post-production information. Then once their methods are there and you have collected and you reviewed the production information and post-production information, then you need to check the results. What are the results came from the review, and all those results need to be documented and need to be maintained, and those results can be those results is your risk management report, that is RMR. So from these results only you can prepare the RMR, and all these results and this RMR need to be documented in the RMF, that was risk management file. So the responsibility for review, that who is going to review. So the responsibility of the review shall be assigned in the risk management plan. So in the initial stage during the risk management plan, I already told you to give the authorities and to give the responsibility to the authorities is very much required. So the responsibility for review need to be assigned in the RMP to the person having appropriate authorities. Sam, I want you to do the next two slides.
Okay, thank you. The next two slides cover a major change in risk management that has occurred with 2019. Clause 10 in 2019 has been extensively revised and now aligns with Clause 8, which is the measurement, analysis, and improvement in ISO 13485-2016. Both promote the requirement for an active process for obtaining product information from the field instead of waiting for complaints. And I do want to mention at this particular time that FDA is doing two things in the United States. They will be, they've accepted 2019, and as of 2022, will not be accepting 14971 2007 as part of any submission to FDA. You will have to be compliant with 2019 in order to submit a 510K or a PMA. In addition, there is now a movement within the FDA to move from 21 CFR 820 as the QMS system to 13485 2016, which is now in effect, and it's estimated to probably take 2 or 3 years to comply. But that's important when you relate to post-production activities. That reduces the amount of time you have to comply. In the past, all we've waited for is complaints coming in from the field to do an analysis of what our product is performing with a user. Now you need to do an active process. You need to do a survey on a regular basis with your users using such tools as SurveyMonkey in the United States. Going to your professional meetings and holding surveys of users of your product when you're demonstrating your device or exhibiting your device. You may need to visit your users to determine what's actually going on, and that may require you coming up with a survey that you ask the nurses, the doctors, and healthcare professionals. And if you get something different from what's in your risk management activities, you need to go back to your risk file and look at those differences and update them and see if you can mitigate the risk that you found. Another method would be to look at your manufacturing process and determine from your product failure analysis on your manufacturing floor, do those relate to any possibilities of failure in the field? You need to review your CAPA findings and determine root cause analysis to a degree that you haven't been doing probably before. And again, you need to look at your audit effectiveness and include that as part of your internal audit. All these facts need to be recorded as part of your post-market surveillance in an active format. There is one more additional thing that you can do if you have a new device, and that would be to do a survey of the literature to see if a competitive device that is out in the field, do they have any recorded publications on the performance of their device, and are there any new risks that weren't recognized during your risk analysis? That possibly could be done as part of your CER and recorded on a regular basis. You have to do that every year. The guidance to this is in TR 24971 Clause 10. I highly recommend that you purchase this and read it thoroughly. It's now 100 pages longer than it used to be, and it's packed with guidance, recommendations, and normative references, which are not included anymore in the 2019. Although it does refer to normative references, it doesn't include any. So you have to refer to 24971 to get the normative references. The revision of 14971 2007 versus 14971 2019 include a reference to normative references in clause 2, which is still there in 2019, but it's not defined. You have to look to the guidance document to define that. Clause 4 in 2019 introduces the general requirements for the management review system, including the risk management file, assignment of persons with a proper authority to be able to do risk management, and that's not always an engineer. It may be somebody on the regulatory team, the clinical team, a physician, or somebody in the quality team. It needs to be a cross-functional team that does risk analysis. Another addition is that it's defined that top management needs to review and accept the definition of risk and how much risk they're willing to accept. The evaluation of overall residual risk has changed. The acceptability has been struck, and it just remains overall residual risk. The risk management report is now a risk management review. And again, as Arun pointed out earlier, that has to be reviewed by management prior to release of the device into the field. The other thing that has changed is the risk management the risk analysis that's been done in the past has always been done in fault conditions. However, the new 2019 refers to normative and fault conditions, which will require additional risk analysis measures to be used to do the risk analysis. And again, those can be found in the TR 24971. The other thing that I wanted to mention is that the definition of harm has been changed in the new standard. Physical harm has been removed and it just says harm. It's been expanded to include the environment and other forms of harm that were not considered in the past.
Yep.
The other thing that I wanted to mention was, again, the design inputs need to include the applicable outputs of risk management, which are risk control measures that are defined in ISO 14971, but are also defined in 13285/2016. So that implies that you need to do your risk analysis before your design input. And again, that needs to include more risk tiles and risk tools than just the FEMA. So those are the major points that occur in the changes. There was only 2 additional pages added to 14971/2019. However, there was 100 pages added to 24971 to show you where the emphasis is and give you guidance on the application. And thank you, Arun.
Thank you, Sam. So here we come. So we are in our last phase of our session. So what we have learned today, I just bring all together here, just give you a brief summary and that what we have learned from this 1 hour session through these slides. So I told you that I explained you that what are the new terms and definitions we are added to this third edition of ISO 14971 2019 version. Then risk analysis tools and processes. So Sam and I explained you that what are the tools you can follow or you can perform to do a better risk analysis, and what are the risk analysis processes. Then benefit risk analysis. What are the process you can perform to do a better benefit risk analysis so that you can claim your device benefit outweighs the risk. So I explained you that process. Then I also told you that how you can do risk evaluation, how you can evaluate the risks, and how you can review the risk management process. What are the processes you can review the risk management. Then Sam again, Sam explained you that what is the effect of production and post-production activities, or how you are doing risk management throughout the production and post-production activities. Then also Sam explained you that what are the differences between this second edition and this third edition of ISO 14971, and also the requirement of this ISO 24971, this 2020 version, with the third edition of ISO 14971, how the 24971 is 100 pages longer, and it's always recommendable to read this 24971 with the ISO 14971, so that you can get the better knowledge how you can implement the risk control measures and how you can do a better risk assessment according to the 2019 this third edition of ISO 14971. So that's all from my side. So over to you, Ankit. Thank you.
Thank you, Arun. Thank you, Sam and Kuldeep. That was really helpful, I think, for our attendees. You guys spread so much values between them. So now I will request to all the attendees, if they have questions, they can type it in the chat section, or they can raise their hand. I will unmute them and they can ask their questions. We have some questions for now. I will just assign those questions to our panelists and they can answer those questions till anyone else.
Okay, are you going to ask one of us to answer the questions? I think we have already 5 questions.
Yeah, Arun, can you just answer the first question of Jim? That is, can you also touch on the differences between 14971 and the new EU MDR regulations?
Yes, sure, Jim. So the ISO 14971 is the risk management. You need to perform your risk management according to ISO 14971, and also EU MDR is also telling you that what are the processes, how you can do the risk management according to the EU MDR regulation. But there are a few differences are there between EU MDR and 14971, but still you can do the risk assessment as per 14971, this 2019 version, and also you can refer the same the risk assessment as per this 14971 version in your tech file, which were prepared according to EU MDR, and also you can incorporate the requirements of the EU MDR risk assessment to your tech file as well.
Okay. Matthew, you can ask your question. You are unmuted now. Matthew, can you hear me? You can ask your question. Now our panelist can hear you. Yeah.
Sorry, we were muted. So the question is, what is the best way to document a risk that is related to a user or using a medical device when they should inherently know how to use that medical device because they're a doctor and medically trained or educated as part of that medical degree? Basically, if they're a doctor, there are certain, you mentioned there are certain things they should know how to do and how to work with. What's the best way to document that?
Sam, do you want to answer that?
Sure. Best way to do that is to document the risk that may be associated with somebody who may not have had appropriate training, and then the mitigation would be, for example, putting for prescription use only onto your labeling. You do want to mention it, but the assumption is that the devices are well known. That's also defined in the TR 24971. It does give you guidance on that particular analysis. I also did want to mention something else about the difference between for EU MDR in 14971 2019. EU MDR and the MDD as it stands right now assumes that you will be using state-of-the-art standards. And state-of-the-art standards means anything that's been published. So in some of in the past, there was always an effectivity date. Now there is not. It's meant to be used as soon as it's published and accepted within the European community. I hope that helps.
Thank you, Sam. Sam, can you answer one more question I just had forwarded to you? This is from Allison. Do you have that question?
I don't see it.
Maybe you want to unmute Allison and see if you can ask the question using audio.
Oh, I see it.
Oh, you see it? Okay.
The standard specifically says a review of the risk management process at planned interviews. It clearly states, and it does state, that it's not part of your quality management system. So you're asking internal audit findings is a whole separate process that you do. I don't know how often you do it within your company. We used to do that on a monthly basis and review our audit findings. But this is something different. It goes beyond your audit findings, and it has to be a risk management review on a regular basis. It can be whatever your SOP says, as long as it's planned and it's on a regular basis. Does that answer your question?
Alison have one more question. Kuldeep, can you answer this question? He is asking about standard requires.
It starts from which I am able to see questions, but which one is that?
Third one from the top.
Does it start with if we cannot reduce risk?
The standard requires review of the suitability of the process.
Or the standard requires review of the suitability of the suitability of the process. I did not understand. Sam, do you understand? Is Alison there? Maybe he can ask.
Alison, I can unmute you if you want. You can ask your question directly. You are unmuted now. Yep.
You can hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, sorry, I don't know what I was doing before. I couldn't unmute myself. But to clarify on the questions that I had earlier, so my intent with the review was, yes, that the standard requires that we review the suitability of our process at planned intervals. My question was though more regarding, I wasn't sure, and maybe I misunderstood the review of the actual file at planned intervals, meaning annually, because we're taking the approach in that the process is reviewed at planned intervals in accordance with our internal audit process, and that information is fed up to upper management. And then in terms of our, I guess, routine review and updates of our files, that of course is fed in through the new product development and post-market complaint processes. So we don't necessarily have like an annual review of our files per se, because they're routinely being updated. So I just wanted to clarify, I guess, the intent of your comment, and if you were saying that we do in fact need to have like an annual review of the file itself.
In my opinion, if you do that, your recipe states that you're going to review your risk management process as part of your internal audit process, or your review of complaints on a regular basis. In my opinion, that would be sufficient, because you've
Okay.
defined it. You're actually communicating it. I think where the standard is coming from is people were not doing that.
I see. Okay, thank you. And then in regards to my final question was for the benefit risk analysis. So in the risk control option analysis, it of course states that if we cannot reduce the risk any further and therefore do not have any options for risk controls, we have to do a benefit risk analysis. However, when you get to, I think it's 7.4, clause 7.4, the actual benefit risk statement says that the manufacturer has the option of doing the benefit risk analysis. So I wasn't sure if you were able to elaborate or clarify on that at all. I guess in my interpretation, it's somewhat contradicting. In one clause, it's saying that we have to do it. Another one says that we may be able to, and even TR 24971 says that we have the option of doing it. So again, just wanted to get some clarification.
There are some points that aren't clarified very much in this. But my interpretation of that is, if you can't get it done, remember, you have to define your risk and what is acceptable risk. And if you can't get it down below that, then you need to go back and take a look at your design or your process. But if my interpretation is, if the risk is outweighed by the benefit, then you can leave it in there. That would be my interpretation. If the benefit is outweighed by the risk, then you need to do something.
Okay, that makes sense. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Sam, there is one more question for you. He is asking from you. He is Regan Long, and he is asking something. I just forwarded to you.
Sure. I didn't mean to imply that FEMA is not totally applicable right now. What I meant to say is, or imply, is tell you that FEMA is not always going to work. And that's because FEMA is based upon a fault analysis and not natural conditions or conditions. So you need to look at other risk analysis other than just FEMA. FEMA is appropriate, but you need to look at additional ones. And there are a whole list that can be found in TR 24971 of ones that can be used to supplement your current risk analysis and how you do it, that would address those questions. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's what I meant. Did you want to unmute him and see if that answers his question?
Matthew, do you want to ask some more questions, as I can see on the question dashboard? Matthew, can you hear us? Okay.
There are a lot of questions.
Yeah.
You want to take all of them? So it's
Yeah,
more
I'm just assigning this question to Arun. Arun, just check. I had given you one more question. Prasanna is asking something from you.
Yeah, I can share it. How to mitigate residual risks? Yep, I explained you earlier that there are many processes. The complete risk control measure process is to mitigate or to minimize. When I told you like control the risk, so here you can mitigate or minimize the risk by implementing the appropriate risk control measures to the risk. To the estimated risk, then you can control or you can mitigate or you can minimize the risk as far as possible. So always you can minimize or mitigate the risk as far as possible, so that you can evaluate the overall residual risk properly.
One more question here is, Kuldeep, can you see that question from Sam Lazara? He is asking something on European MDR.
Yes. I think, Sam, you are absolutely right. EU MDR has a strict risk management requirements compared to MDD. And one of the reason behind that has been, MDR is aligned to 14971/2019. A lot of aspects of that has been added. Obviously, the risk reclassification is another big change. As you know, quite a few of class 2B devices, for example, spine, a lot of spine devices were class 2B, they moved to class 3. Most of the orthopedic implants are moved to class 3. That is based on the risk assessment of implants that have high risk. Sam, do you want to add more to that?
No, I think that's fine.
We have one more question for Arun. He can answer this question. Arun, can you see a question on your dashboard?
Yes. What do you mean by acceptable risk? Okay. So whenever you are accepting risk, so I told you in the very first page that you cannot avoid all risk. You cannot avoid the complete risks which were associated with your medical device. So you can mitigate or you can minimize the risk as far as possible. So once you minimize or once you implement the risk control measure, then you can minimize or control the risks. But still there are risks are there which were going with your device to the end users. So those risks need to be evaluated or estimated. So those called as overall residual risks. So those risks need to be evaluated, and those you need to check that whether those are acceptable or not acceptable. So you have already defined criteria in your risk management plan. You should define the criteria for acceptability of your overall residual risks in your risk management plan. So you need to check the criteria and you need to check that whether those risks are acceptable or not.
So guys, this is the last announcement. Do you have any other questions for our panelists? And for those who are asking in the chat section for the recorded version of this presentation, yes, you can have a recorded version, and I will just announce where you can find the recorded version of this webinar. So moving ahead, thank you everyone for attending this live webinar. I have one more important announcement of the day, that our next webinar on TGA CRs, gap analysis with EU MDR CRs, will be held on 21st October at the same time, and invites for interested attendees will be shared on their respected mail IDs. We will share a recorded version of this webinar with all the attendees, and you can also find our other webinars and this webinar on our website, which is www.saracasolutions.com. Let me repeat it again. Our website is www.saraca, S-A-R-A-C-A, solutions, SOLUTIONS.com. You can check out our webinar recordings. We have done lots of webinars like this topic. And now I have something more which will help to qualitize our next webinar and upcoming webinars. If you will answer, this will really be helpful for us. So I'm just sharing some polls with you guys. So these polls will appear for 20 seconds, and then I'll move to next poll. I will just request all to okay. Thank you for your patience. I'll just move to next poll, and here is the next one. These polls will be really helpful for us to do our best in our next webinar, so that we can spread values between our attendees and help them to qualify all regulatory and quality necessities. I'm moving to next one. Next poll is and our next poll is also here. Sam's favorite poll is here now. If you want to see more seminars, webinars on these topics from Sam, you can just vote him and he will be there for you. And our last poll is also here. Thank you guys for being there. I think all of you were there for at least more than 1 hour, and looking forward to our next webinar. I will just repeat it again. You can have our webinars recording on our, you can visit to our website, which is www.saracasolutions.com, and just go on the webinars page. You can register for our new webinar as well from there, and you can download or review our previous webinars and this one on the website webinar page. Thank you. Thank you, Kuldeep. Thank you, Arun, and thank you, Sam, for being such a lovely panelist and answering those questions very patiently.
Thanks, Ankit. Thanks, Sam. Thanks, Arun.
Thank you.
Thank you
Thank you.
so much. Thanks to all.